Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Hope you had a good lunch. I also wanted to say, because this time is for people for sharing, if there was something that somebody wanted to ask or share and they didn't want it to be recorded, we can press pause on the recording so that it's not part of it. So don't let that put you off, and just let us know and we can press pause.
Or otherwise they can just type a message into the thingamajig
chat,
and then if you just put anonymous, just want to remain anonymous, we're happy to talk to the question, but just keep it anonymous. So yeah, we just like to open this up. I mean, it's day one. We do it over 3 days for a reason. New people especially, it's like day one can be quite heady, and day 3 is usually the time when people are really starting to listen. So it's like we do it over 3 days for a reason. So day one, this is day one questions. You probably find day one questions very different to day 3 questions, but there is no wrong questions. No wrong questions. Please don't worry about any of that. You can't get it wrong. Annette.
Hi. I'm really interested in something that Jenny said earlier about you, Dave, about thought, because I so often relate to thought being the narrative that goes on inside my head. And I loved what she said. Was something in what she said where you were talking about thought in nature and thought that you see everywhere. I'd love to hear something about that.
You've got a couple of examples. I know you haven't got any props that you normally have.
I usually bring props, but no, I feel like I've done more learning about myself, or should I say I've done more learning about life through observing wildlife. And I was a tree surgeon for 17 years. And my tree surgery became very different after I realized what I realized about life, and I started to see beyond the superficial nature of beings, creatures and animals and plants and whatnot. And it wasn't long before I no longer wanted to cut trees. I didn't want to cut them down. I didn't want to hurt them, because I started to see that if you sit, I remember we were up in Scotland one time, and I took Jenny to a standing stone area called Cairn Holy. And there was a man there called Joseph, and I guarantee you now he'll be there right this very second. He's always there. And I remember him saying to my mum saying to him, what do you see in this, Joseph? And Joseph just stopped and said, may I ask you the same question? What do you see in here? What do you see in this? He said, because if you look at something long enough, it will teach you something. I spent a lot of time looking at trees and looking at plants. And as I looked at them, I found knowledge kind of coming. And it's true, if you look at something long enough, you will learn something about it. And my first insight that I had on the day that I awoke to this other dimension of life that is everybody. It was when it took place from the moment I saw a jackdaw. And many people have probably heard this story who know me. But it was in seeing this jackdaw observe me. As it flew over, it glanced at me. And I happened to be looking at it. We both kind of just saw each other. It was just minding its own business. I was stood there. I was obviously something unfamiliar on its landscape. So it took the moment just to look at me and carried on flying. That was it. But it was in that moment I woke up to the realization that thought, consciousness was me, and it was the jackdaw. The jackdaw would never have known I was there without a thought to recognize a difference on the landscape. The memory of what the landscape would normally look like compared to what it now looks like, what it looks like in this very present moment with me stood there. It was aware of a contrast. I'm aware of contrasts. And it was in that moment where I realized everything is enlivened by this force. And people, these are words, mind, consciousness, thought, they're words. We must forget the words. We must go beyond the words. The words get us stuck because we think we understand words. It's not in the words. The words are a guide, they're a metaphor, they're a pointer, they're a signpost, they're just a label. You see, the word pen is not the object. The word jumper is a noise. These are just noises that we make. Words are just noises.
I think Sharon would call that a sweater.
Sweater.
Not a jumper.
Yeah, that's where she's wrong. But I realized the jackdaw was a conscious thinking being just like me. We are all conscious thinking beings. Plants are conscious thinking beings. They react to stimulus. They know which way the light's coming from, so they orientate their leaves. They face the flowers of the heads of the flowers. Quite often with daisies and things like that, they follow the sun round. And then as it starts to get dark, they are aware and they know what to do and they start to close up. You can observe that in any park. And if you go for a walk in your woodland and look up, your local woodland, walk through the wood and look up and see how many trees are actually touching each other. You'll probably find that the only trees that actually do touch each other are the ones that have either snapped branches or fallen over and are resting in other trees. There is an awareness within the tree community of one another, self and other, which in itself is ego. Idea of self, recognition of self, separation, self and other. I look at Rusty and my little dog, and he's very different to my mother's dog, Pebble. Jack Russell's, very different characters. They see a different world. So when we're talking about the principles, this is why I say they're not a psychology, they are a fact about life. What they're pointing to, what the principles is pointing to a force that exists within life. We are all that force. All living things are the force. The insect on your window is a conscious thinking being. Doesn't think like us. But then again, I don't think like Jenny. I don't think like my sister, and we have the same genetics. Each is an individual expression of reality, just like we are. An individual, the thing is about the human being on this conversation is we're an individual expression of reality, trying to figure it out. From what I can tell, the other beings have either figured it out or just getting on with life. When I say figured it out, I look at the tree kingdom and I look at the way that they work together as a community. They're not trying to outcompete each other. That's a fallacy. That's a myth. That's a story. Trees don't outcompete each other. Nature itself isn't competition. It's a cooperation. Humanity creates competition as an ego. If you look at nature, consciousness helps every single living being the best it can to survive. Everybody is trying their best to just get through life, right? So consciousness itself is helping an individual, but it's also helping the whole. It's always trying to help the whole as well as the individual. It's a concentration within itself of an individual within the whole. And so when we're talking about these principles apply to every single living organism, every single cell in the body, in fact, because you can remove a cell from the body and it's in itself, it is aware. It is aware. It has the capacity to recognize danger and therefore shy away from it. look into the study of epigenetics if you want to look into more of this. Dr. Bruce Lipton, look into his studies. Study of epigenetics, how Dr. Bruce Lipton was a man who studied cells and realized that every single cell was a conscious thinking state, almost a state of being in the micro state of what the full organism is. Everything the full organism does, everything a full body does and being does, the cell does. Takes in food, shies away from toxins, does everything it can to survive. So yeah, these principles, there is a knowledge that underpins. Most people don't even question, like, simply what made humanity.
I just wanted to add to what you were saying before. The thing that really struck me when you spoke about thought within trees and plants was that they don't have a brain in the same way we do. And
No.
so much of the time we think of thought as being something within our brain and
That's right.
thinking. So suddenly it took thought out of being what I understood as thought, the word, the definition. And I had to kind of broaden my idea of what that meant, what that noise or that word was trying to point towards. And I think that was the thing that struck me the most, of like, wow, this is not just human. This is something that lives all things. Thought is not what I think it is. And then that kind of took me out of the known. I know what the three principles are. I know thought, to, whoa, this is so much bigger than anything I've had as a concept in my mind. I think that was the thing that shifted for me. Was I remember it was in the Stoke by Nayland lodges and you were talking about it, and then I looked outside and we were surrounded by trees and plants there, and I was just like, this conversation is so much bigger than I'd appreciated, and it can't be known by the intellect.
You can't know it.
And I think that's why I loved it so much.
You find thought, you find the creative source. But even if you do find it, you'll only realize you don't know it. You realize you can't know it. To know something is to take an infinite field and condense it into a singular thought, because that's what knowing is the condensing of an infinite field into a singular thought. To know something, knowledge. That's why many people would say it's an unknowing, it's an unlearning. Or people would say, I know I'm wise, for I know nothing. Sid would say, try and realize you don't know anything. Because it's only in that space that you opened up, and the only thing that prevents us from opening up is knowledge, what we think we know. And when you're opened up, it's like new things come to you, new possibilities, new examples. I think we'll talk a bit more about the nature side of things perhaps tomorrow or the day after. Because I could just go off on one.
Great question.
And I usually do.
Amanda, yeah.
Yeah, no, that what you're saying about the cell, I mean, that's I was just thinking about I mean, in the future apparently there's going to be these things called med beds. Don't know if you've heard about them, but basically they can take your DNA, your original DNA, and then depending on whatever symptoms you've got, I don't really know exactly how it works yet. I need to look into it a bit more. But the science, probably in about maybe 10 to 15 years, there'll be a med bed that you can lay down on. So you'll go, they'll take a sample of your blood to see what your original DNA was. And obviously, for some people, I mean, I'm an acupuncturist and I work around well-being, but people will obviously come in with symptoms, but a lot of the symptoms that we or behaviour that are displayed are basically through our through our choices that we make. It could be bad choices or not necessarily bad, but depending on your choices, that could then manifest in symptoms. But the med bed apparently it can even, I heard another practitioner I was talking to, she said that it would be able to regrow limbs.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm curious about it because I've lost my hearing in later life when I was like 39, and I thought to actually see, in my lifetime something that could restore that would be amazing. Anyway, we shall see, but that's quite exciting, really.
Yeah. You can
Anyway,
see
it's
it.
good
Like,
to
you,
be
you
here.
can, we're sat here now and we don't give it a second thought that we're just using this thing called Wi-Fi and the internet and computers. This knowledge has always existed. We've just never been ready to, up until this last few years, we haven't been ready to receive it or put it into practice. So you see, it's like as human beings evolve consciously, new information comes, new possibilities come. And that's what happens when people come across the principles. It's like when they have that shift in consciousness, when they become aware of something deeper than themselves, it brings to them a whole new way of seeing the world. A whole new paradigm, a whole new world becomes available to them. And that's what's happening to humanity en masse, like as we awaken, as we start to become more conscious, as we start to become more in touch with the invisible. It's like beautiful opportunities like that start to present themselves and exciting new possibilities start to come into the world. That's fantastic. I'll look into that. Med beds.
But even just to, regardless of how sort of conscious and awake we think we are, but even just to be reminded. I love what Jenny said at the beginning of the day about, so like if you've been around the principles for a long time, maybe you can get to a point where you think, oh, I know that, or sometimes I notice it in myself. I think maybe I'd be a bit closed off or something, my mind. But it's a nice to remind yourself that we don't know things, or our brain thinks it knows it now or something.
Yeah. You get that, and then you also get the individuals who go, what do the principles say about this, along a similar kind of ilk. It's like, what do the principles say about this? Principles don't say anything about that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the deeper point.
I also loved Linda Amos, who is an amazing woman who did so much for the principals within communities, and there was a whole division, 3 principal services division in Santa Clara County in California. And I remember speaking to her about how amazing the principles were, and at that time Rudy and I were doing the movie site and we wanted everyone to hear about the principles. And she's really kind of unassuming, and as she was speaking, she just said, what I'm interested in is, when does change happen within people? What is it that happens within someone when transformational change happens? And she said, it's through insight, it's through new thought, and that can happen anytime, anywhere, because the principles is a metaphor or a description of who and what we are. So regardless if you've heard of the words 3 principles, change and evolution can happen. And I think that's something that I got so caught up in the principles world because it's been so amazing for me and it's become my family. I kind of got a little bit like defensive of the principles, and I'd almost try and defend it against other ways, but I realized it doesn't matter how people come to insight, what they listen to. And I think I've loved being much more open to listening to different teachers and different philosophies. I've got interested in different religions and had conversations with people. And I think that's the thing to remember. This is a beautiful, simple way to point and describe what already is. But there are loads of beautiful ways, and we don't have to shut our ears off because we think we have something or we've found something. I've realized the principles is almost a beginning or an opening, and I can keep listening to the same 3 principles talks and hear something different every time. And then I can listen to something that isn't titled the 3 principles and hear it running through it. And I think that's the nice thing. Like, I didn't have to defend it or try and hold on to it or think it was the best thing ever. It was what I was listening to when I woke up. And I have a deep respect for that. But I have a respect for all kinds of teachings.
I think that's quite a good point. It's like, it can be really easy to wake up to somebody while somebody's talking and then go, they're the oracle. And Sid has been worshipped in a lot of ways by a lot of people. But Sid would say, I'm no more wise than you lot. And I think it's quite an important point, is that he's not, is that having a respect for the principles, but not being fanatical. Because it can be quite. It's a lot of fanatical people about the principles, and I've been one. But it's nice to drop that and be humble enough to listen to other people.
Dave and Jenny, greetings. John here.
John, how you doing, man?
Pleasure to meet you. I'm really, really enjoying this. And I'm curious with this, it has struck me previously, we as humans, as Homo sapiens, kind of see us as a superior organism. And we've got these brains, and what separates us from our wonderful dogs and other animals in our lives is we've got these prefrontal cortexes that allow us to do things and think and create. And I've, over time, have begun to see this as kind of, that's what stands in the way of us realizing our true nature, right? Like that is in many ways what we have to overcome. Like my dog is here. My dog is always in the present moment. He's not worried about retirement. He's not worried about what happened yesterday. And then you're talking about plants and trees, and we see how wonderfully they coexist, right? If only we as a human society could coexist in the same way. And here he is.
Hello, friend.
And so when you mentioned that thought, that and Jenny, that really resonated when you said, take away the thought that I think happens in my brain, right? Because the plants, but so I wonder, are plants and trees, are they really thinking, or the fact that they're not encumbered with a brain, are they that much more readily able to tap into their true nature and just follow and exist from there, which says, so I think no doubt to me they have consciousness, and that kind of moves them. But I'm just wondering whether it's really thought that they have, or is it mind and consciousness? And maybe that's the trick. They don't have the thought. So I'm curious. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Cool, great question.
It is an awesome question.
I think the thing that comes to mind is it was that the word thought, when Sid was using it, was a universal principle. But I had attached my ideas of what I thought was to thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to expand to, I don't really know what that is, but that intelligence and that force of movement, and seeing how, we've just watched a really old David Attenborough series called The Private Life of Plants or something.
Oh, yeah.
And it showed kind of all these different orchids and then the different bees that are needed, and they're the only two that interact together. And the intelligence that spans that, I would say, is what the principles describes. And within that is the movement of knowing and interaction. But I don't know in terms of, I know that Rusty thinks very differently for me in his little world. He's our little Jack Russell. And he smells and senses things and hears things that I can't. And I'm just aware that we do view plants and things in a way that we think we understand them. But I realized, God, I have no idea what an experience of being a plant or a tree is. But it felt like when Sid spoke, it was about universal. It's true for all. And when we were watching that Private Life of Plants, and you're kind of just seeing the intelligent design in it all, it's just phenomenal. I'm like, we have to take thought out of thinking, because that's such a small aspect of it.
Yeah.
But it's almost like that same capacity that's within all life, within plants, we are too. And I think we've got very interested in our thinking and our clever ideas, and not kind of seen it as a broader, unknowable intelligence. And I think that's what happened to me, because I've heard the word thought my whole life, I think I know what Sid was talking about. But I think he was talking about something so much grander than thinking.
Mhm.
But then also thinking is a beautiful gift that we do then get to create things like Zoom and computers that we get to interact with one another in different countries. It's phenomenal, but that there is that deeper part of it. I don't begin to think I know the answer to that question.
Thank you. I love it.
Yeah, I think it is something that
It's really nice to meet you, and thank you. That was a great question.
It is something that we must, in order to truly find what we are all looking for, we must start to not look at the words. To me, thought, is another word to describe creator, source, consciousness. We're always separating things out. We're always creating dualities. We're always creating dualities, or thought separate from consciousness. No, it's in that space, there is only that, and all comes from it. And it is the space of all knowing. It's everything. And all things come from it. All things are it. Everybody is it already. It's not something to add to ourselves. Everybody is already it, in the same way as every single snowdrop is it. And my sister used to have a mimosa plant, and she called it Gilbert. And this mimosa is a plant that, look up mimosa when you get a chance. They call it the sleeping bush. And if you touch it, all its leaves close up, folds in half, and faints. And we found them. We found them in Nepal. They're amazing little things. You stroke them, and all the leaves close up in this sleeve, fold in half, and faint. And then it just disappears out of view. Now, it only did it when somebody touched it or when it felt disturbed. And it was such an interesting thing, because I bought one for my sister. And at first, my sister lives in a static caravan. And when she'd walk into the caravan and shut the door, the vibration of the caravan was enough to startle the plant. It would close up and it would faint. And Lise loved this plant, and she kissed it. And it got to the point where it didn't close up when my sister kissed it. It learned. It wasn't something to be afraid of. So this was something we got to bear witness to. This is something we actually watched take place. But the interesting thing was, when I kissed it, it closed up. That's what happened.
It's the beard. I have the same issue.
Yeah, it didn't like the beard. Absolutely, man. It didn't like tongues.
I do think that it was.
But it was such an interesting point, like, to see a plant learning. I mean, we would call it learning. And I think another thing that humanity has tended to do is go, human beings think, animals, and all other. I mean, does this really stand to reason that all other beings work on a different thing?
Right.
You know, it's like humanity has got such an ego. It's separated itself from nature. It thinks it's something separate from nature. No, it is nature. It's built from all the parts of our bodies are made of the earth. Every single carbon, iron, water, calcium, phosphates, and all these things you can find in the soil. You can dig it up, and I think it costs, for the stuff to make a human being from a chemist, it costs about 12 quid for all the parts to make a human body, all the bits. But it's the same thing as what all the other animals and plants are made from as well. So it's like our bodies are an integral part of the earth because we're made of the earth. And we've said that plants and animals, they work on instinct, you know, but humans think. And it's like, what's instinct? Well, if you really look at what instinct is, it's thought that humanity hasn't managed to figure out yet. So it puts it under this category, as we're very good at doing, boxing things off and going, that's instinct. Oh, we understand it's instinct. We'll just leave it at that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, but it's knowledge. It's like swallows that fly from South Africa to Great Britain each year and go to the same house that they were born, build a new nest. I mean, that's knowledge beyond our intellects. We call it instinct because we don't understand it, so we can still maintain this sense of supremacy and awareness that surpasses all things. And then you've got the salmon and the eels that can go from the Atlantic or the Pacific up to the same tributary, or the eels that go down to the Caribbean, and they'll end up in the same tributary to a river where they were first spawned. So you see, this is all within the realms of awareness. This is all within the realms of thought, but it's thought beyond what the human being is normally gaining access to. But we all do have access to these kind of, we call them superpower, but it's not. It's totally normal. The unnormal thing is we've shut ourselves off to it. The capacity to communicate and stuff. And
I was just thinking, I don't know if people remember Lisa telling the story last time. It was either the January retreat or the October retreat, but she was laid down by Lisa's Dave's sister. She was laid down by, I think it was Kentmere, this reservoir, and this bee kept coming over and was flying in front of her, and then it'd fly just into the water again and then come back and then go back to the water. And in the end, she's like, it feels like it's trying to tell me something. And when she looked, there was another bee like almost drowning. So she went and got this out, had it on her hand, let it dry out, and then they flew off together. And she said it almost felt like it knew that she was safe and that maybe it could help. And she just said she tells so many stories like that, because I don't know, like she lives in a static caravan, and there's been times where she's just been sat there and a little blue tit's come in and sat on her hand and connected with her, and then she's sort of thought, oh, it's going to fly off at any moment, and it stayed with her for like 5-10 minutes. And then she's
had to take it out.
Yeah, like she's walked outside with it on her hand, and it's still sat there, and it'll fly away, and then it seems to come back with other blue tits and sit in the tree, and to her it sounds like singing, but they're talking. And I just think it's that idea that there's something in our brain that makes us so much more intelligent, and then we look at something else and think, oh, it doesn't have that. I don't know, I think there's, like you were saying with the studies with trees, which you might talk a bit more about tomorrow, but how they, if one tree is covered up so it can't photosynthesize, other trees around it send it nutrients,
even if they're not from the same species.
Right.
So I don't know, I just feel like there's such a
cooperation.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing that I just went, this is so much bigger than I understand.
We've thought we've known stuff.
Yeah, and I did.
We're only just starting to wake up and be humble enough. Humanity's only just starting to wake up and go, there's a lot we don't know. Yeah, I'm right. There's a lot we don't know.
It occurs to me that we might call it instinct because magic is too scary.
It could well be, but
right.
Yeah. And it doesn't fit the narrative that we've been brought up with.
David, what about caterpillars then? Imagine a butterfly changes its DNA 3 times. It changes all the things inside its body. How amazing is that?
Yeah. Deep intelligence. And you see, it's like
we're the smart ones.
Intelligence itself. I mean, one of the things Sid Banks said was, this is all, the universe is a divine thought. Everything is a divine thought. Everything is an idea. We're all an idea of the universe. It's no mistake that humanity is so beautifully created like every other being. And the way that the biome of the earth works, where insects interact with plants and the plants interact with the sun, light. And, the everything interacts and has its perfect place. It's no mistake. It's not random. We've been brought up and told it's random. It's not random. It's beautiful. It's perfect. It's the opposite of random. It's perfect.
I thought you were telling me about those ants that farm.
Yeah, they farm plants to get the fungus. So there are other farmers in the natural world, but it's like we've been brought up with the idea that this is all random chance. This is kind of almost like a Newtonian way of seeing the world. Quantum theory over 100 years ago said, no, consciousness is absolutely integral to matter. Consciousness is absolutely integral to the physical world. Yet we've not been taught anything more about quantum theory. Quantum theory was pointing to what the mystics of the East have been speaking about for thousands of years. Your mind has the power to influence the world around you. Consciousness is absolutely vital for the collapsing of electrons and photons and stuff into particles, as opposed to just being infinite potential. Consciousness takes the infinite potential, and whatever we think, it collapses it into a potential. This has been discovered by science. So now you've got science and spirituality running parallel with one another, almost like train tracks. Neither wants to go onto each other's track because you'd have to choose different words, but it's just words, but because what they're pointing to is the same. And it's I find it such a fascinating thing. It's a beautiful time to be alive. And I think that was an awesome question, John. Thanks, mate. If there's somebody on the other screen.
Debbie?
Oh, hi, thanks.
Where we at?
I was wondering,
Hi, Deb.
yeah, you mentioned about kind of you can think stuff and make it happen, or ask for, no, you said about asking for things. And I've heard about people talking about like manifesting stuff and like to do with law of attraction and stuff like that. I don't know if it works like that or if it's something different. What does that look like?
To me, if we get hung up on that, we would always be trying to manifest something that will make us happy, that we think will bring us more fulfillment and joy into our lives. Knowing that fulfillment and joy doesn't come from circumstance is the most important thing to start to manifest the awareness of. You know, people want to manifest more money. Why do I want more money? So I feel more secure. Money's never brought security. I know seriously rich people who are so stingy and they feel everybody's going to rip them off. And in fact, they feel poor. And I'm looking at them going, you're not poor, you're minted. And it's like, what I'm trying to talk about when I talk about that is I want people to open up their minds to realize that they are more capable, that life is more capable, that life isn't what they think it is, that they're not who they think that they are capable of things beyond what we kind of talk about in the mainstream, what we've been led to believe is possible or impossible. We're greater. Yeah, there are gifts within. I've seen it myself where I've prayed for things and out of the chances of it happening, you wouldn't go and put a bet on it, you won't bother, but it's coming to it's happened. The circumstances in the world have aligned to bring that circumstance into my experience, but that's not the point. If we get stuck on that point, we will spend our life trying to manipulate our mind and manipulate the world to suit what we think we want. But what we all truly want is peace, love, and connection. That's it.
We've got a friend who's written loads of books about manifesting, and her I don't think it's her latest one, maybe 2 back, was called Becoming Genevieve, and she actually tells her story of how she became her pen name, because her pen name was Genevieve Davis.
Yeah.
And she said she'd spent so much of her life and she'd got really good at this manifesting stuff, and she'd managed to get out of a huge amount of debt through this stuff she'd been learning and these incredible books she'd written. But she said the one thing I couldn't manifest was happiness. And that's when she fell into the principles and met Michael Neal and had this shift. And she said it was so strange because when she was kind of poor and living in this horrible old flat, that she had an excuse to be unhappy. And then suddenly she'd like manifested wealth and all this stuff, and she was still unhappy. So she didn't have anything to blame it on anymore. But I think now what she shares is more of getting to know who you truly are. And then kind of what you create in your life is very different. But like we like before we do a retreat, like last night, we were like, please, bring us what people would need to hear, like, and bring the people to us that should be here. And like we ask for those kind of things. And I kind of understand prayer a bit more. But I think sometimes it becomes a little bit material, but yeah. I think it's pointing to something much deeper about our creative force that we are than just trying to create material things. So it's almost
it's getting in touch with that space within yourself first.
yeah.
When I used to go out before I had my realization, I would get into a fight every single night, guaranteed. Just the way I was. I would attract dickheads, and I was a dickhead. Dickhead attracted dickhead. And it was really interesting because when that dickhead part of me died, it was like I could go out and I didn't attract the dickheads. When that aggressive side of me died, those people didn't come into my world. They literally didn't come into the world. They didn't exist. So it's like you could say that is manifestation in itself. It's like the shift in consciousness created a new world. The world that we see is a manifestation of consciousness. It's a this is the point. It's like there is this force behind our being that is literally creating our entire world. We think we experience the world. We don't. We experience our generation of a world within our being. That's why we speak about separate realities, that everybody is literally a space of reality. They are a separate reality. They are their own world. They're their own entire universe. This is the nature of this quantum field, if you want to call it that in science, or this is the nature of God, if you want to call it that in religion. It doesn't matter. Just words. Again, we're back to words. Same thing. But we are all generating the world that we see. We are creating it. We are the ones that are so powerful we can create reality. Now, most people are unaware of this. When I say reality, I'm talking about experience and an outside world. But let's just look at experience first, because that's what really we want to change. You change your experience, the outside world changes. It's just the way it works. But we've been so tied into changing the outside world to change our experience. I'll be all right when, I'll be all right when, I'll be all right if. We know somebody very close to us who spends so much of their time living in the what ifs. Oh, what if? What if? Have you locked the door? Have you done this? Have you done that? Oh, don't put that there. What if? And it's like, that's the reality that they're generating for themselves, and that's their world. And it's quite interesting because a lot of the time things don't turn out perfectly for them because they're living in this heightened state of anxiety of the what ifs. They're living in that reality. And there's always something to be afraid of. But it looks like it's all coming from the circumstance and people around them not doing what you should be doing, that you should be doing that, or that shouldn't be happening. Oh, we haven't done that. It looks like all that stuff's creating their experience for them. Experience isn't created outside of ourselves. Look at that. It's a logic. Experience cannot be created outside of us. We must be generating the experience. When we find that, when we realize that to be true 100%, not 99.5, not, yeah, apart from that bit. It's like when we see that's the truth 100%, you really start to wake up from within yourself and realize what you've been doing to yourself. And you realize that the dickhead that was outside was you. It was me all along. And it still is sometimes. And we can start to take account and ownership of our own lives and respect ourselves. We can forgive ourselves. We didn't know any different. We could be kind to ourselves. We could be kind to others because they're just the same as us. You always say it's amazing that we actually all get on at all, given the difference in reality. You only have to look at everybody's different characters to see what their likes and dislikes, to see that they see a different world to us. No two people on earth see the same world. That's such an important point. 7.6 billion human separate realities on the face of planet Earth. 7.6 billion. Whose reality is the true reality? Whose reality is the true reality?
Could I just...
Hiya, Hides.
Oh my God, it's really bad. I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. I had my hand up really raring to say something and I can't... Oh God.
It's behind you.
I honestly, I had something really good to say and I've completely forgotten. Sorry.
That's okay.
If it
it
comes
If I
back,
remember, I'll put my fat finger up.
cool, love. Thanks, lovely.
Anybody else? And Debbie, did that kind of speak to your question?
Yeah, thanks. I really like what you said about Genevieve. I hadn't heard of her, so it's kind of like you've got to get it the right way around. You have to bring the kind of peaceful feeling in first and raise your awareness in order to kind of like change your circumstances or move towards kind of where you want to be in life, is what I heard anyway.
Yeah. And to do that, do you know how to do it?
What, how to feel peaceful?
Yeah.
I've seen something of that recently, mainly around kind of not resisting stuff and kind of surrendering more to the circumstances and also feelings that come up.
Yeah. I mean, the best way to find it is just to leave it all alone and just live. And it'll just start to emerge into your life. You'll probably find that you've actually spent an awful lot of time in there in your lifetime, but only to realize it wasn't that. You didn't realize what it was. Or perhaps you've been there and then you've been waiting for it to disappear, so you've created an anxiety around actually having peace. That's what I used to find with myself. If I ever woke up peaceful, I'd go, oh, fucking hell, here comes a shit day. And the moment I've like had this peaceful state, I'm going, oh, well, if I feel peaceful in the morning, I'm going to have a bad afternoon. And guess what? It's like that peace lasted about 5 seconds. After that, I just felt it drain out of me as I generated a new experience with thought. So you see, it's like, it's us that's standing in our own way, our ego. The idea that we are something other than peace. We are total peace before anything else. Peace is just a state of being without any intellect getting involved.
I was thinking about how we unconsciously manifest. Dave has such a problem with Hermes delivery. Anything to do with it, he gets stressed.
Yeah.
Like he likes to buy and sell things. So there's a lot of like packing up and sending things that happens.
Not drugs.
No. But you hate anything to do with Hermes, and it always goes wrong. So we'll go somewhere where you can print the label and it won't print for Dave. And in the end, now I'm like, you stay in the car, go nowhere near that machine, because if you're near the machine, it will not work. So I have no idea how it does work, but I'm sure something about you and electrical things. I'm normally like, Dave, you just stay away from it because you make things not work, like even the laptop and stuff. Like, I'll set it up and then you just come and sit down at the last minute, because he's got this energy around hating it all that it never works for you.
Computer user non-technical. That's what my mate calls me.
It took me 2 years to get that as well, that joke.
It's not a joke.
Anybody else?
I was listening to the radio the other day, and the Dalai Lama was on. It was a recording of him back in 2013, and he said something really quite profound. He said that we were all here at the Big Bang, at the beginning of the universe. We were already all there, and that just sort of went poof. Wow, of course we were all there. Of course everything was here. And it was just such a moment of clarity and understanding that, yes, we are just all moving through the universe in our own little ways, making of it what we can.
Or what we do.
Loved it.
Cool, man.
I had a bit of a moment last Friday, actually, along those lines. So my introduction to the three principles was a bolt out of the blue 4 years ago. And I had literally gone to a seminar to learn about possibly becoming a coach. and to learn NLP. And the trainer started talking about Sid. And I don't even know what it was he said, but in the first half hour, something he said clicked and tipped my world upside down. So it was really cataclysmic for me. So that was 4 years ago. And I've had a couple of other sort of big insights, but generally my life has just plodded along gently since then. And then last Friday, I've had a spell of ill health, and I felt quite disconnected from everything, which was one of the reasons I wanted to come here as well for this weekend. But because I felt like I needed to reconnect with everything in this world. And I had this moment in an afternoon, just sitting, I was reading actually, and something just popped into my head. Oh no, I wasn't. I'm lying, completely lying. I was actually listening to a podcast in the kitchen and I was cleaning. And I was scrubbing my sink, and it was a Rich Roll podcast. He was talking to his wife, Judy Pyatt, who is a very divine, very spiritual person. And she was talking about the fact that astrologists are constantly discovering new planets. And I just it was like time stopped. And suddenly I just could see like the whole cosmos. And I had this thought exactly that thought that we're all made of stardust. And we are all part of that cosmos, and we were before we existed, we are now, and we will be afterwards. And it was like such a mind-blowing, I can't tell you. And since then for the last week I've been living in this little golden bubble of pure peace, completely reconnected, and this today has been so wonderful, because I think in being a coach, we made a big transition moving to Morecambe. I've had all these things going on in my life, and I think what I heard that first day, I'd kind of not lost touch with it, because it's still there, but it just, I don't know, there was just this sudden, I think I'd lost a little bit of acceptance. And when I first discovered Sid, I had total acceptance, and that's back. And it's so lovely to feel that connection and just feel that I just saw how big everything is and how small we are, but how important every single thing is that exists in the universe. Every leaf, every flower, every human, every dog, every fly, whatever, I just saw it like in an instant, that it was amazing. And I haven't really got words to describe it, but it's literally, isn't it funny how something so small can just in an instant like that just put you back in that place?
Can I say something?
Hides, can we just address that? And can we just address Penny, and then certainly. Okay. Have you got it in your memory what it is?
No, it's a different question this time. Can I quickly just say, because I might forget?
Go on then.
Have you ever realised the thought that your imagination is outside your head and it's really vast? That's one thing, but with your imagination, you can't actually imagine something that you have never seen before. You can only imagine things that you've seen. Like you can imagine the sea and the sand at the beach. You can imagine the sky and the houses. But two things I know I could never, ever imagine is the depth of the sea with my imagination, because it's miles and miles and miles deep, and your imagination is so deep that you cannot actually visualize the depth of the sea. Like you can't actually visualize the depth of the atmosphere and the universe and all the galaxies. You can't picture, your mind can't expand that wide to see the depth of the sea or the sky and the galaxies and the universes. You could probably picture Mars, because in your brain you've seen a picture of Mars somewhere, like on TV or something, but you can't, your imagination doesn't actually go to the extent where you can imagine the depth of the sea or the vastness of the universe.
I felt like,
and there's one more thing. Have you ever asked yourself the question, when we existed, we began, yeah? Have you ever asked yourself the question, how could we begin if there's no beginning? Because to have a beginning, there has to be a beginning. So how did we begin the whole thing? Because something had to begin it. Do you see?
Yeah. And
So like we
those
began,
the
but we were
questions.
created from something, and that something was created from something, and that something was created from something. But how can something begin from nothing? There must have been something to begin that. But if you go back all the way, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that theory exists in this world of form. You know, we're so used to having a start, middle, and end, because that's how we see life. We were born, we live a life, and then we die. A plant is born, it lives a life, and it dies. We have a journey. We start here, we're in the middle of journeying, and then we get to our destination. It's like we start at, I'm 41 now, I'm in the middle of my 41st year, and next I'll be 42. It's like we're so used to kind of splitting things up and looking at life through the realms of the physical and what the physical behaves as. But
And
I
the
think,
fact that
one second, once hides. But when we start to look within ourselves and we start to get in touch with that, the part that we're talking about, you start to realize, well, that doesn't exist in the realms that are limited, should I say, by beginning, middle, and end. They don't, it's not limited by that. It's not limited by time. Time doesn't exist in it. Time, it doesn't exist in time. Time exists within it. So it's like,
I had an insight that I imagined the history of planet Earth, for example. You started with the dinosaurs lived, and then they were extinct, then the cavemen, the ice age, and all that. I think that we're all basically stepping stones for evolution. Every other person that's born is then a step forward to, like a stepping stone to evolution. And it's so funny, I had this thought that we're all stepping stones for evolution, and God has created us, and he's trying to keep us occupied with things to do whilst we're these stepping stones, so we don't get bored just being a stepping stone. We can't go 100 years in the future, 1,000 years in the future, but our ancestors can. It's like a stepping stone. Each person is a step. Yeah. And it's like saying we've got restaurants, we've got TV, we've got socializing, we've got schools, we've got all this, and that is just what God the Creator's given us to enjoy being a stepping stone. He's given us things to enjoy whilst we're this stepping stone for evolution, so we don't get bored. And it's like
quite interesting, because we've actually given it to ourselves, haven't we? If you really look at it, no external force has given us that. We've kind of brought that into our own world through ourselves. We've brought those things like restaurants and things like that through our own self. We've dreamt them up and then executed them into the world. I think this is a point where
evolution is man-made.
Well,
our experience of evolution is man-made.
Well, evolution's change, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if you look at change within life, within nature, change doesn't take, we were always told evolution's like a random thing. But if you really look at evolution, each plant or animal or organism evolves in a way that suits itself to fit into an environment, which is ever changing in itself. So all matter, or the whole world is always in a constant state of change. But as each state of change takes place, everything adapts around it, or it ceases.
I asked someone the question the other day, if you had a choice, you could either go to sleep now and choose to wake up in 1,000 or a couple of thousand years time, or just live this life and die and don't reincarnate. I wonder if people would either go to sleep now and want to wake up 2,000 years ahead, or 100,000 years ahead and wake up again and be in the future, or would you just rather live this life that you've got and die and not worry about seeing the future?
Yeah. All these questions, you see, when we start to ponder bigger questions, it starts to open up our mind. And that's why we say to people, when you come to this conversation, don't come with a preloaded idea as to what you want to talk about, like what you want to get from this, because that can be a really limiting thing. But when like what you're saying there, Hides, is it sounds to me like, and then I'd like to go on to somebody else who's, if there is another question, because we've only got 5 minutes left before break. When you start asking 10 minutes in, when you start to ask these bigger questions, it's like it opens up your heart and it opens up your mind. You're back to that state of being that Jesus would speak about when he would say, become like a child, to enter the kingdom. He was always telling people the kingdom is within you. It's not a place you go to after death. The kingdom is within you. It's now. The kingdom, to enter this kingdom within yourself in the present moment, to find yourself within your own being. First of all, you must find yourself like the child. What is a child like? It's a child that asks questions, big questions. It's an openness. It's a not knowing. It's not contaminated with
Nick
all.
uses that.
Heidi, 1 second, love. Let me just finish this, and then I want to go to somebody else, if that's okay. Just see if there's any more questions. If there isn't any, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
But it's like that openness. It's that being open, the being prepared to drop what we think we know, what we think we've been taught, allows people to kind of ask the bigger questions, like what Heidi's asking. And it's a beautiful thing when people start to ask those questions, because you start to find a sense of wonder and awe about life, like a child again. Thanks, Heidi's love. I just want to I was
just going to quickly say as well, like Penny, what you were saying, it's so cool that you kind of you'd had the awareness that you weren't feeling as kind of connected, and you were going to come to this weekend, but then out of the blue, just listening to something hit you, and like that remembering happened. And I think that's and then you've come to this in a very different way, so then you're listening completely differently, and I love how that works. And then one of the other things I wanted to say to Hyde was, it's kind of, when you talk about trying to understand or realize the vastness of the sea, I get why we can't get our head around that, but also to know that our imagination isn't limited from what we've seen, because I know that there's people that have been born blind, and then they write, and people create fantasies and other worlds and other lands. Like, there's no end to imagination. But I think we sometimes feel limited, but we're not limited, because someone had to have the idea to create a computer, a mobile phone. Someone had the idea about the telephone and those kind of things. So it didn't exist before, that it wasn't in the world of form, but it was brought to us by insight. And I think sometimes we feel limited. But is there any other questions?
It was Einstein's definition of intelligence was imagination, wasn't it?
We've got 7 minutes, so we've got time for some more
Can
questions.
I just quickly say one thing? Nick,
Heidi, so 1 sec, love. Can we just go?
If there's no more questions,
we'll come back to you, love.
Okay. Sure, then. There's no more questions, Hyde. Go for it.
Hit us. You're muted. 1 sec, love. You're muted, love.
Nick used to refer to the body as a temple, but also a vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah. There's been all these things that are trying to point us in a direction, haven't there?
And I'm now unlearning it all.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Nick said he's now unlearning it all.
Go lad, Nick. It's interesting. It's like there's certain people that these kind of conversations appeal to, and there's certain people that these kind of conversations don't appeal to. It's such an interesting thing. You walk through life and you meet all these different people on earth, and we're all different. Some of us are aware that there is something that is deeper about life. Some of us are aware of it, and we go in search of this, and we just know we're searching for this thing I'm searching for. And we often ask people, what do you think you're searching for? And it's amazing the concepts that we dream up of what we think we're searching for, because we're not searching for anything we're not searching for what we think we're searching for. But I remember when I woke up myself, it was like a lot of my friends, I thought I'd lost the plot. Like, oh, Dave's gone all spiritual now. Or, fuck off with your spiritual. And it was I find it such an interesting point that all around the world, there are people on different kind of stages of awakening. It doesn't make anybody any better than anybody else. It's impossible. It's totally and utterly impossible for the most enlightened person to be any better than the unenlightened person. We're all the same. Everything is the same force, just playing a different game. And I think at that point, it's like, I think it's just beautiful, because the only reason I was saying that is because I've watched Nick like over this last few years, and Nick knows there's a deeper aspect to life. And it's beautiful to see this. It's like, I love watching people waking up. It's like, I love being part of it. I love waking up myself over time, and being part of this game and being part of this conversation. I love being around the people who are awakening. And I also love the challenge that people who aren't interested bring as well. You know, the people who perhaps are very tied into the material paradigm, very tied up in belief and ideologies and things, and the challenge that brings into my life to play that game of interacting with those people who don't think like me. You know, the growth that is available to people who, when we interact with people who do not think like us, the growth that is available for all of us, should we be aware that this is how life truly works. It's like when we start to realize that you can learn from any moment. Life itself is a teacher. You are the learner, but no teacher can ever teach you anything. No teacher can ever teach anybody anything. All learning takes place through us. Teacher can guide and point and point and point and point. If a teacher could teach somebody something, we would just say it and everybody would know what we were thinking. Everybody would know what we're on about. But it needs us to realize it. And this is where all learning takes place. It's realization after realization, or insight upon insight upon insight upon insight upon insight, insight within. From within our own being, we are connected to a source of infinite knowledge. We are a source of infinite knowledge. We know how to live our lives. We know what's best for us. Are we prepared to put down what we think we know for what we truly know? Are we prepared to put down what we think keeps us safe for true safety? All the things that we think keep us safe are ultimately our prison. Yeah, you are safe in a prison. People can't get in. But you're not free. You also can't get out. So it's starting to see that the things that we think keep us safe, one of the ridiculous things I used to think is, well, depression and anxiety, that's familiar. I feel comfortable in it. Anger's familiar. I feel comfortable in it. I know who I am in that space. I'm comfortable with that. But I didn't realize it was my prison. It was the thing that was keeping me prisoner, was that belief and that die hard. I can't let go of that because that's who I am. Who am I without that? As though I was just going to puff up into nothing. I would just evaporate. But only to find that when that does die, what you become is just far more peaceful and happy and content and accepting of life.
Bruto?
Thanks, Hides. Thanks, Nick. Thank you, everybody, for asking those beautiful questions.
So we're going to come back at past, and Dicken will be with us. And I know that he loves questions. There will be time at the end. I think he normally does a bit of a talk, and then we'll take questions from people.
So that's 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're doing well with timekeeping. That's good. See you in a bit.